As the weather cools, the days shorten, and it's time to start stocking up on popcorn and hot chocolate for those nights you find the creepiest ghost stories to gather and watch. One that is watched by all the little bobbling heads in front of the screens every holiday. A tale of everyone's spooky, hellish, flaming pumpkin, decapitated equestrian, the Headless Horseman. Tracing the origins of the Headless Horseman legend is more complicated than one realizes. Most Americans are familiar with the Headless Horseman lore thanks to Washington Irving's 1820 short story, The Legend of Sleepy Hollow, and many animated film adaptations since. Although the Headless Horseman is trumpeted as America's first ghost story, the tale borrows heavily from several European storytelling traditions. Traditional folklore is actually swarming with decapitated riders, from Celtic mythology to the collected fairy tales of Brothers Grimm. Let's grab our snacks and beverages and get comfortable in the dark, and hear a little recap of the famous The Legend of Sleepy Hollow, the story of Ichabod Crane. The story starts with a note that the tale was written among the papers of a deceased man named Diedrich Knickerbocker. The transcript tells the story of a young man named Ichabod Crane who was a school teacher in a place called Sleepy Hollow 30 years earlier, around the year 1790. Sleepy Hollow is part of the larger farming community of Tarrytown. It is one of the oldest Dutch settlements in New York, and situated along the picturesque banks of the Hudson River. Residents are fond of repeating stories of supernatural sightings and unusual occurrences experienced in Sleepy Hollow, and the area is considered both enchantingly peaceful and terrifyingly haunted. The most frightening of these is the tale of the Headless Horseman of Sleepy Hollow, who was believed to be the ghost of a Hessian soldier decapitated by a cannonball during the American Revolution. The Headless Horseman is reported to ride swiftly through Sleepy Hollow at night, as if reenacting the battle that took his head, before returning at daybreak to the churchyard where he's buried. While Sleepy Hollow's inhabitants are mostly descendants of the early Dutch settlers, Ichabod Crane is notably an outsider from the state of Connecticut. He is extremely tall, thin, and lanky, with a flat head and a long, beak nose, giving him the appearance of a scarecrow. Despite his thin appearance, he has a ferocious, seemingly bottomless appetite. He is a strict but mostly fair teacher, although he more often punishes the stronger boys while sparing the weaker ones. Since his salary as a school teacher is very small, his students' families board him for a week at a time. Ichabod prefers the homes of students whose moms can cook, as well as those who have pretty older sisters. To further earn his keep, Ichabod performs light farm work and assists with taking care of babies and small children. Ichabod is also the choir master and earns additional money given singing lessons. He considers himself a talented singer and is known to sing loudly each Sunday during choir services. Ichabod is a firm believer in witchcraft and the supernatural, a belief which deepens as he spends more time in Sleepy Hollow. His favorite book, History of New England's Witchcraft by Cotton Mather, and he knows it nearly by heart as he rereads it in his free time. He enjoys spending evenings sharing and listening to ghost stories and other supernatural tales with the older women of the town. He is particularly enthralled by the story of the Headless Horseman. However, Ichabod is also afraid of the dark and frightens easily on his evening walks home after these conversations. Ichabod enjoys being surrounded by the young women of the town and impressing them with his education and his refined taste. In particular, he hopes to court Katrina van Tassel, the beautiful and flirtatious daughter of a wealthy farmer. Ichabod is drawn to Katrina not only for her good looks and her charm, but also because she is an only child and set to inherit her father's wealth. He dreams about all the delicious ways the Van Tassel farm animals can be cooked, and he fantasizes about selling the estate and moving to the frontier with Katrina if they marry. Katrina, however, is already being courted by Abraham Van Brunt, known by his nickname Brom Bones. She is rumored to be encouraging him, and his horse is often seen at the Van Tassel farm on Sunday evenings. Popular and good-humored, Brom is locally recognized for his physical strength, his prowess as a horseman, and his penchant for play and pranks. His reputation has successfully intimidated the rest of the young men in town from Katrina, except for Ichabod. Ichabod does not openly challenge Brom for Katrina's heart, knowing that Brom would beat him in a physical fight. Instead, Ichabod gives Katrina private lessons twice a week. In this way, he can spend time alone with her, without her parents. This enrages Brom, who retaliates by playing various pranks on Ichabod. He and his friends break into the schoolhouse and turn all the furniture upside down. They stop up the schoolhouse chimney so it fills with smoke. Brom also trains a dog to howl whenever Ichabod sings, and then he gives it to Katrina. One autumn afternoon, Ichabod, along with the rest of the town, receive an invitation to a party at the Van Tassel farm. In his excitement, Ichabod dismisses his students an hour early so he can get ready. He spends extra time on his appearance before leaving, fixing his hair and putting on his only suit. To impress Katrina, he borrows a horse named Gunpowder from his neighbor, Hans Van Ripper. Gunpowder is an old plow horse, scruffy and grumpy, and blind in one eye. The stirrups of Gunpowder's saddle are too high up for Ichabod's gangly frame, and Ichabod's knees are bent as he rides, giving him the comical appearance of a grasshopper. On his commute to the Van Tassel home, he fantasizes about the food he will eat alongside Katrina if he successfully courts her. The party is in full swing when Ichabod arrives in the early evening. Brom is already there on his own horse, Daredevil, a strong, fast horse that no one else is able to ride. The young men and women are all dressed up, but Ichabod skips socializing and goes directly to the food. Ichabod spends a long while enjoying the many delicious savory and sweet dishes that have been put out for the guest. As he eats, Ichabod becomes increasingly happy as he fantasizes about the day he will own the farm as Katrina's husband. Ichabod is in an extremely good mood as the music starts and he starts dancing on the dance floor enthusiastically. He believes he's an excellent dancer. His mood continues to improve as he dances with Katrina while Brom angrily watches. When the dancing concludes, Ichabod joins the residents of Sleepy Hollow as they tell stories. Some of the older men tell exaggerated tales about their days as soldiers during the American Revolution. Eventually, the topic turns to ghost stories and of ghost sightings, especially of the Headless Horseman. Brom jokes that he once raced the Headless Horseman, and he claims he would have won if the horseman wouldn't have disappeared in a flash of fire, as he usually does once he crosses the church bridge. Ichabod shares his own, more sincere ghost stories from his hometown in Connecticut, of his nightly walks in Sleepy Hollow, and excerpts from his favorite book, History of New England Witchcraft. As the party winds down, Ichabod stays behind to speak to Katrina, sure that he successfully courted her. The narrator claims not to know what is said between the two, but implies that Katrina rejects him. The narrator also speculates as to whether Katrina used Ichabod's attention just to make Brom jealous. Ichabod leaves the party looking dejected and crestfallen. As Ichabod rides home in the dark, pondering all the ghost stories of the evening, he becomes increasingly spooked by the surrounding noises of the night. He prods Gunpowder to move more quickly, causing the old horse to stumble off the road. Soon after, Ichabod notices a large figure astride a horse. He slows down to let the rider pass, but the rider keeps pace with him. When Ichabod finally gets a good look at him, he's horrified to see he is headless and carries his head on his lap. Terrified, Ichabod kicks Gunpowder again, and the old horse begins to run. A chase ensues. Ichabod can barely hold on, but feels relief when he sees the church bridge up ahead. He believes the headless horseman will disappear when he crosses it, just like in the stories. Ichabod looks over his shoulder as he reaches the bridge, but the horseman does not disappear. Instead, he throws his head at Ichabod, who is knocked to the ground by the blow. The next day, Ichabod is nowhere to be found. He doesn't show up at the schoolhouse, and Gunpowder has returned alone without his saddle to Hans Van Ripper's farm. The townspeople conduct a search that leads them to the church bridge. They find Ichabod's hat and a smashed pumpkin, but no Ichabod. Ichabod's disappearance soon becomes legend among the Sleepy Hollow residents. Some believe he was taken by the Headless Horseman, and others suspect Brom played a trick on Ichabod. Brom, who eventually marries Katrina, always laughs whenever the part about the smashing pumpkin is told. Years later, a visitor to the area swears that Ichabod is alive, living in Manhattan, and has made a successful career as a lawyer, politician, writer, and judge. The story concludes with a postscript from Diedrich Knickerbocker, who claims to have transcribed the story as he heard it himself. Knickerbocker describes the storyteller as an older country gentleman with a good sense of humor. The story is received with some laughter, except by an older gentleman who is tall and very serious. He questions what the moral of the story is supposed to be. The storyteller gives 3 lessons. First, to take a joke as we find it. Second, competing with someone who is sure to beat you is foolish. And thirdly, that some losses in life lead to better opportunities in the future. The postscript suggests that the storyteller may be Brom, and on the other hand might be Ichabod, but it leaves this open to interpretation. Now let's hear another story that is said to be the origin of the Sleepy Hollow legend by Washington Irving. It is said to have happened in New York, in Tarrytown, by a small town of Sleepy Hollow. One of the most badass specters to ever haunt the planet, the Dullahan, a sinister villain of Irish folklore with roots in Celtic mythology. Harbinger of death, the Dullahan may be an adaptation of the Celtic fertility god Crom Dubh, who demanded blood sacrifice through decapitation. Although Crom Dubh mostly left Ireland with the spread of Christianity, his influence still lurks in the legend of the Dullahan, a demonic fairy who clasps his own decaying head under one arm and swings a whip made of human spines in the other. The Headless Horseman is a New York ghost story. The legend goes like this. It is said to have begun during the American Revolutionary War. It began near the deserted roads of a town called Sleepy Hollow. It is said that the Headless Horseman was, in reality, one of the many hired German mercenaries by the British during the times of war. The soldier's head was lost during the war, and his headless corpse was buried in an old church in Sleepy Hollow. In New York, the night was cold and moonless. A Dutchman left a tavern in Tarrytown. The Dutchman walked toward his home in a hollow nearby with a lantern in his hand. The path that he took went by the graveyard of Sleepy Hollow. It was the same graveyard where a headless Hessian soldier had been buried. At midnight, the Dutchman was near the graveyard. The graveyard could be seen from a distance. The only light came from the Dutchman's lantern. The past week had been warm, and winter was at last gone. The snow had started to melt. Suddenly, the Dutchman became scared. He remembered the rumors that had been going around. The tavern was full of such talks and tales. A galloping ghost goes haunting the cemetery, the Dutchman had overheard someone saying at the tavern. Slowly, the Dutchman began to walk. He started humming to himself in order to keep himself busy. As he was walking, he saw a strange light rising from the cemetery ground. He stopped right in his tracks, unable to move, his heart pounding with immense fear. Out of nowhere, a white mist began to rise in the graveyard. It then burst through a grave that had no name or headstone. And out came a headless horseman. The Dutchman shrieked in fear. A terrible shriek it was. The headless rider was coming toward the Dutchman at full gallop. The Dutchman turned around and ran as fast as he could. He ran towards the bridge, for he knew ghosts and evil spirits could not cross running water. All of a sudden, the man lost his footing and stumbled. The Dutchman fell off the road and fell into a patch of melting snow. Before he knew it, the headless horseman thundered past him. The Dutchman got a closer look at the headless rider this time. He noticed that the headless horseman was wearing a Hessian commander's uniform. The Dutchman waited in the bushes for at least an hour after the headless horseman disappeared. After making sure the road was clear, he quickly ran home, composed himself, changed his underwear, and then he finally calmed down enough to tell his wife about his encounter with a ghost. Everyone in Tarrytown knew about the story by the next afternoon. The Dutch people had different opinions. Some believed in the ghost of the Hessian commander, whereas others didn't. Some thought the headless Hessian was searching for his head, and some believed that every night the Hessian commander rose from his grave to lead his men to Chatterton Hill, not knowing the British had already claimed it. Whatever the reason, no one knows for sure. The headless Hessian continues to roam the roads of Tarrytown till this day. Alright guys, you can come out now. I hope you guys enjoyed these tales of the Headless Horseman. Thank you all for being here and watching. Please leave me a comment. I love my comments. They're like Christmas to me. Thank you guys so much who watched this. And if you did like it, share it out. Please share. And I will see you guys soon on the next episode of Tales Told in the Dark.